What if the most crucial clue in a baffling disappearance was hiding in plain sight, recorded frame by frame, just waiting for someone to look closer? This is the story of Mara Collins, a woman who vanished into thin air one quiet night in the small town of Lake Haven. Her car was found parked by the water, doors unlocked, with her phone and wallet still inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, and no ransom notes. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. The local police were stumped. They searched the woods, dragged the lake, and interviewed everyone who knew Mara. Friends described her as happy and stable, with no reason to run away. Her family was devastated, clinging to the hope that she would walk back through the door at any moment. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, that hope began to fade. The case went cold, filed away as another tragic, unsolved mystery that would haunt the town for years to come. Mara Collins became a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered among locals. But hundreds of miles away, something seemingly unrelated was happening. A man named Evan Halle was driving his delivery truck, making his usual overnight run. He passed under countless traffic cameras and security feeds, just another anonymous vehicle on a long, dark highway. Evan was just an ordinary guy, trying to make a living, completely unaware that his routine journey was being documented. He had no idea who Mara Collins was, and no reason to think his life would ever intersect with a missing person case from a sleepy lakeside town, but technology holds on to secrets. Years later, a cold case detective with fresh eyes decided to revisit Mara's disappearance. He started digging into old files, but this time he had access to new software that could analyze massive amounts of video data. He expanded the search radius far beyond Lake Haven, looking for anything out of the ordinary on the night Mara went missing, and that's when he found it. A single, grainy image from a highway camera hundreds of miles away. It was Evan Hale's truck. But it wasn't the truck that was important, it was the faint reflection in the side mirror. For a split second, a face was visible, a face that looked eerily like Mara Collins. The truth had been there all along, traveling down a lonely road, captured in a single frame, waiting to connect two strangers, and finally reveal what really happened on that quiet night in Lake Haven. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories. In the quiet town of Lake Haven, life ran like clockwork. People woke up with the sun, worked hard, and went to bed trusting that tomorrow would be a perfect copy of today. It was a comforting rhythm, a promise of stability that everyone held dear. But one evening, that promise was shattered. A young woman named Mara Collins, known for her bright smile at the local lakeside cafe, didn't come home after her shift. Her car was found parked exactly where she always left it, near the water's edge. It was almost eerily neat. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no frantic footprints in the soft earth. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The initial search was intense. Police combed every inch of the shoreline, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Volunteers spread out into the dense woods that hugged the lake, calling her name until their voices grew hoarse. Days bled into weeks. The posters bearing Mara's smiling face, tacked onto telephone poles and shop windows, began to fade under the relentless sun. The town's collective hope slowly soured, curdling into a quiet, gnawing fear. The people of Lake Haven, a town that prided itself on knowing everything about everyone, settled on a simple, terrifying explanation. Mara had just disappeared, swallowed by a wave of bad luck and the vast, unforgiving silence of the lake. What nobody knew, what nobody could have guessed, was that the truth wasn't lost at all. It was waiting patiently, already recorded and stored away. You see, Lake Haven was a town under watch. Not in a sinister way, but a practical one. Cameras were everywhere. They perched on traffic lights, monitoring the flow of cars. They kept a silent vigil at gas stations and were mounted in the corners of small, family-owned shops. Even the cafe where Mara worked had a system, capturing the comings and goings of its customers. When Mara went missing, investigators immediately began the painstaking process of collecting all this footage. It was a mountain of data, hours upon hours of digital life. They watched it all, hoping for a clue, a lead, anything. But what they found was overwhelmingly normal. They saw empty roads stretching into the night. They saw the headlights of passing cars, just blurs of light in the darkness. They saw shadows dancing with the wind, playing tricks on the eye. Most of it was useless, a digital diary of a town sleeping. And then there was one camera, one piece of potential evidence, that was cast aside. It was an old, weather-beaten Perkin camera mounted on a pole near the lake, not far from where Murat's car was found. Its reputation was terrible. The footage it produced was grainy, the quality so poor it was almost abstract art. It was known to freeze for long periods and often skipped frames. In the official report, it was marked as unreliable and quickly dismissed. The case, lacking any new leads, eventually went cold. The file was placed in a cabinet, and the town of Lake Haven tried its best to forget, to heal, to return to its comfortable routine. But time doesn't erase what a camera captures. It just buries it, hiding it amongst thousands and thousands of perfectly ordinary, unremarkable moments. Months crawled by. The seasons changed. The memory of Maura Collins became a sad story told in hushed tones, a local ghost story. But cold cases have a way of being reopened, of calling out for a fresh pair of eyes. A new investigator, transferred from a bigger city, was assigned to clear out old files. He decided to start Murat's case from scratch. He believed that no detail was too small, no lead too cold. He went back to the evidence room and pulled out the boxes of digital tapes and hard drives. He resolved to rewatch every single second of footage collected in the initial investigation. He sat for days in a small, dark room, his face illuminated by the glow of the monitor. He watched the same empty roads, the same passing cars, the same dancing shadows. And then he picked up the drive labeled Unreliable, the old Perkin camera near the lake. As he began to play the file, he understood why his predecessors had given up on it. The image was a mess of blurry pixels. A timestamp jumped erratically, but he kept watching, his eyes straining. And then he saw it. Through the digital snow, the unmistakable shape of Murat's car appeared in the frame, pulling into its usual spot. He leaned closer. A few minutes passed in the distorted time of the recording. Then another vehicle entered the frame. It was a dark sedan, nondescript. It pulled up and stopped directly behind Murat's car. The investigator held his breath. He was watching the moment. The sedan just sat there. For less than 2 minutes. There were no visible faces, no one getting out of the vehicles. There were no sudden movements, no signs of an altercation. It looked like 2 cars just happened to be parked near each other. It was almost nothing, but as he stared at the low-quality image, his trained eye caught something else. A tiny detail, easy to miss, hiding in plain sight at the bottom corner of the frame. It was a reflection on the dark, rippling surface of the lake, a small, rhythmic blink of red light. It was pulsing on and off, on and off. The reflection was coming from the rear of the second car. It had a broken tail light. That tiny, blinking reflection was the key? It was the missing piece of the entire puzzle. The investigator suddenly had a unique identifier, a digital fingerprint for the mystery vehicle. It wasn't just any dark sedan. It was a dark sedan with a specific broken right tail light. With this new information, the investigation sprang back to life. Police began cross-referencing the broken tail light with a list of known associates and locals who owned similar cars. It was a needle in a haystack, but now they knew what the needle looked like. The search led them to a man who lived just a few towns over, a man who had a brief, unremarkable connection to Murat when they found his car. Tucked away in his garage, the right tail light was shattered, hastily covered with red tape. The blinking light, captured by a forgotten camera and reflected on the water, had been there all along. It was a silent witness, a tiny beacon of truth in a sea of digital noise, waiting for someone to finally notice. The truth, it turned out, hadn't been swallowed by silence. It had just been hiding, in plain sight. This case is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important clues aren't the loud and obvious ones. They're the quiet details, the things we overlook, the data we dismiss as useless. It's a lesson in patience and perspective. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into incredible true stories. See you in the next one. The police started their search, combing through every lead for the vehicle described by witnesses. It was unlong before they zeroed in on a local car that seemed to fit the description perfectly, a dark sedan with a broken headlight. A collective sigh of relief swept through the small town. The first major blow came from the broken headlight itself. Technicians meticulously compared the fragments of plastic found at the scene with the suspect's damaged car. They didn't match. The type of plastic, the way it had shattered, the color, it was all wrong. It was a devastating setback, but it was just the beginning. Credit card receipts, phone records, and eyewitnesses placed him miles away from the crime scene at the exact time it occurred. There was no way he could have been in two places at once. The timeline was impossible. The case that had seemed so open and shut was now falling apart at the seams, and the investigators were back to square one. The town's brief sense of security evaporated, replaced by a chilling realization. The real culprit was still out there, hiding in plain sight. Desperate for a breakthrough, the lead investigator decided to re-examine the original surveillance footage. They had watched it dozens of times, focusing on the make, model, and the obvious damage to the car. But what if they had missed something? What if the key wasn't in what they saw, but how they saw it? He gathered his team in a darkened room, the grainy video playing on a large screen. This time, they weren't just looking at the car. They were looking at everything. The shadows, the reflections, the subtle movements in the background. They watched the clip again and again, slowing it down, frame by painful frame. Then one of the younger detectives pointed at the screen. "Wait, go back. Look at the reflection on that storefront window." The investigator rewound the tape. As the mystery car passed by, its headlight cast a reflection on the glass. But it wasn't just a steady beam of light from a broken lamp. It was blinking. Not randomly, but in a distinct, almost rhythmic pattern, on-off, on-off. It wasn't the kind of flicker you'd get from a loose wire or a damaged bulb. This was different. This was specific. An electrical specialist was brought in to analyze the footage. After careful examination, he came back with a startling conclusion. The blinking wasn't caused by damage from an accident. It was the signature of a custom electrical fault, a unique short circuit in the car's wiring system. This tiny detail changed everything. The search was no longer for any dark sedan. It was for one specific vehicle with a unique electrical tick. The haystack had just shrunk to the size of a shoebox. The police immediately cross-referenced their database of local vehicles with repair shop records. They were looking for any mention of a recurring, unfixable electrical issue, specifically with the headlights. Hours of tedious work followed, sifting through digital and paper files. Finally, they got a hit. A single work order from a small, independent garage on the outskirts of town. It described a customer who had come in multiple times complaining about a headlight that would randomly blink on and off. The mechanic noted he couldn't replicate the issue and had sent the owner away. The vehicle was a dark blue sedan. The owner's name was one that nobody on the force recognized. He wasn't in their system, had no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. He was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. Living in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, he was the kind of person you'd see every day but never truly notice. The neighbor who kept to himself, the guy in line at the grocery store you'd forget as soon as you walked away. He was a ghost, hiding in the open. When detectives reviewed traffic camera footage from around town, they found him everywhere. Driving past the library, pulling out of the supermarket, cruising down Main Street. He passed cameras every single day, his presence recorded but his significance completely overlooked. He was always there, but never remembered. With a warrant in hand, 2 detectives drove to the address listed on the work order. It was an unassuming house with a neatly trimmed lawn. Parked in the driveway was the dark blue sedan. From the street, it looked perfectly normal. But as they got closer, they saw it. The front headlight gave a faint, almost imperceptible flicker. On-off, the pattern from the video, it was him. When they knocked on the door, the man who answered was unremarkable. Medium height, plain clothes, a blank expression. He seemed more confused than concerned. He denied everything, of course. He claimed it was a case of mistaken identity, that his car had been in the garage all night. But the evidence was now overwhelming. A search of the vehicle uncovered fibers that matched the victim's clothing. Microscopic traces of paint from the crime scene were found on the undercarriage. The blinking light had led them to the right car, and the car was a treasure trove of forensic proof. The man who had moved through his community like a phantom, unnoticed and unremembered, was finally seen for who he truly was. His invisibility had been his greatest asset, allowing him to commit a terrible crime and melt back into the background. But in the end, it was a tiny, overlooked detail, a ghostly flicker in the dark, that brought him out of the shadows and into the light of justice. This case serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most significant clues are the ones we initially dismiss. It is a story about how technology and meticulous police work can come together to solve a seemingly impossible puzzle. The blinking light wasn't just a clue. It was a beacon, cutting through the darkness and leading the way to the truth. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true crime investigations. We'll see you in the next one. When Maura Collins vanished, the town of Lake Haven spiraled into a storm of questions and fear. For months, it was the perfect mystery, a story whispered in hushed tones, a puzzle with no solution. But what if I told you it was never really a mystery at all? What if the answer was right there, hiding in plain sight, from the very beginning? This isn't a story about a brilliant detective or a last-minute confession. This is the story of how a camera, a silent, unblinking witness, solved the case that every human had missed. The official investigation was a textbook example of a dead end. Maura, a beloved local artist, had simply disappeared from her studio one rainy Tuesday afternoon. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, and no witnesses. The police interviewed dozens of people, from her estranged ex-husband to her jealous rival in the art scene. They chased down every lead, every rumor, but each path led to a frustrating nothing. The community organized search parties, plastering Maura's smiling face on every lamppost and storefront window. Hope dwindled with each passing week, and Lake Haven began to accept the grim reality that Maura Collins might never be found. The case went cold, filed away under a growing stack of unsolved disappearances, a painful scar on the town's memory. But one person couldn't let it go, Maura's younger sister Lena. She wasn't a detective. She was a data analyst, someone who spent her days looking for patterns in numbers, not clues in a crime. Grief-stricken and frustrated, Lena decided to re-examine the one piece of evidence everyone had already seen countless times. The security footage from the alley behind Maura's studio. The police had watched it, experts had analyzed it, and it had yielded nothing. The grainy, low-quality video showed a typical rainy afternoon. Cars passed by, pedestrians hurried under umbrellas, and then nothing. It seemed completely useless. But Lena looked at it differently. She didn't just watch it. She deconstructed it, frame by painful frame. She wasn't looking for a person or a dramatic event. She was looking for anomalies, for things that were out of place. For days, she sat in front of her monitor, her eyes burning, watching the same loop over and over. She enhanced the brightness, sharpened the contrast, and inverted the colors, searching for anything, any tiny detail that had been overlooked. Her friends and family thought her obsession was just a part of her grieving process, a desperate attempt to hold on to her sister. They gently tried to persuade her to stop, to let the professionals handle it. But Lena persisted, driven by an intuition she couldn't explain, and then she found it. It wasn't in the main action of the video, it was in a reflection. For a split second, a delivery truck had parked across the alley, its shiny, wet side panel acting as a distorted mirror. In that fleeting reflection, barely a smudge in the poor-quality footage, Lena saw something. She painstakingly isolated those few frames, using software to stabilize and clarify the image. The distorted shapes slowly resolved into a scene playing out inside Maura's studio, visible through the large back window. It was like looking through a keyhole into the past. The reflection showed two figures. One was clearly Maura. The other was a man, his back mostly to the window. They weren't arguing. In fact, they seemed familiar, comfortable with each other. Lena watched as the man handed Mara a small, wrapped box like a gift. Mara opened it and her posture changed. She recoiled, dropping the box. The man reached for her, not aggressively, but perhaps to steady her. And then Mara collapsed. It wasn't a struggle, it was sudden, horrifyingly quiet. The man paused, then carefully lifted her and carried her toward the back of the studio, out of the reflection's view. A few minutes later, the reflection showed him leaving the studio alone, pulling his coat collar up against the rain. Lena's heart pounded. This changed everything. This wasn't a kidnapping or a violent attack. This was something else, but who was the man? The reflection was too distorted to show his face. Lena went back to the footage, this time watching the pedestrians who walked by just moments after the incident. One man, carrying a familiar-looking umbrella, glanced nervously toward the delivery truck as he passed. He was just another face in the crowd, someone the police had likely never even considered. Lena cross-referenced the timeline with witness statements. A neighbor had mentioned seeing David Chun, a quiet pharmacist and a known collector of Mara's art, in the area that day. He was a pillar of the community, a friend to many, including Mara's family. No one had ever suspected him. Armed with this new, undeniable evidence, Lena went to the police. At first, they were skeptical. A reflection in a puddle on a truck? It sounded like a desperate theory. But when they saw Lena's stabilized footage, their skepticism turned to shock. They brought David Chun in for questioning. Faced with the video evidence, the quiet pharmacist's composure crumbled. He confessed everything. The box had contained a rare, fast-acting poison, which he had disguised as a gift. His motive was a twisted obsession. He believed that if he couldn't have Mara, no one could. He had staged her collapse to look like a sudden medical emergency and later moved her body, burying it in a remote location he never would have revealed. Mara Collins' disappearance was never a mystery to be solved by a magnifying glass, but by a modern lens. It was a lesson in what we overlook in a world saturated with images. Every second of video, every shadow, every reflection holds a piece of the truth, patiently waiting for someone to look closely enough. In the end, it wasn't a witness or a hunch that brought justice for Mara. It was a camera, silently recording the details the human eye had missed. The town of Lakehaven would never forget her, and they would never forget that sometimes the smallest, most insignificant detail can expose the darkest of secrets. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into cases where technology revealed the truth. See you next time.